If you've ever picked up a book on screenwriting or watched any film that follows a character of low merit who ventures into the beyond and returns with a gifted power, then chances are you've probably seen this diagram. This is the hero's journey story template, drawn out by famous American writer Joseph Campbell. And if you've ever wondered what films can be put into the same breath as this diagram, well, look no further, because they are everywhere in many different forms. Whether that be sci-fi action, like The Matrix, when Neo becomes the One after his journey in and out of the Matrix, fantasy drama, when Frodo ventures into Mount Doom to destroy the One Ring, or action thriller with a sprinkle of animation, like when Miles Morales becomes the next Spider-Man in his universe. This is basically what you would find in Mr. Krabs' secret formula bottle if Mr. Krabs was a screenwriter. This direction of storytelling has been the prime of its kind, and has been utilized by most writers. Except for this guy.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
because
a little
it's so
of it?
much fun, Jan. Get
Really?
it?
If you were to ask me who the most avant garde filmmaker of the 21st century is, Quentin Tarantino would probably be in my top pick. And that is in no small parts thanks to his unique choice of direction reflected in his gruesome action scenes and well-constructed dialogue. But the reason I consider him as such a great filmmaker is because he's really great at incorporating variety in his writing formulas that freshen up the familiar nature of the hero's journey story template. My initial idea for this video was to focus on my favorite work of his to analyze his writing style, but after watching his entire filmography, this discussion warrants a broader look at his other works of fiction that spawned his great success. So, let's get to it. When I say that Tarantino incorporates variety into his films, I'm not necessarily talking about the subject matter that he works with, because despite the slight difference in aesthetic, his films are consistent with the content they work with, ranging from spaghetti westerns to late 90s crime and revenge stories and fantasy war films. His unique direction and metaphorical color palette to his action scenes merely form the external substance of his filmmaking. However, on a deeper scriptural level, his films are more layered and varied. Writing formulas can be condensed into mainly three categories. The first being character-driven stories, which is where the hero's journey template falls under, locational bottle films, and the semi-chronological event films. Tarantino has made films of all three kinds, and with this video, I want to study some of his more popular work and see how they compare with their pros and cons.
Well, I'm very familiar with you and your family. I have no way of knowing if you are familiar with who I am.
Returning to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey story template, the reason we so often see films that have this formula to their story is because it is very easy to use it in creating compelling stories that tick off all the boxes that make a film good, if they use this formula. In these stories, you have a fun and relatable character with a dynamic character arc, interesting locations to visit with each new scene, and a linear film structure that lowers the risk of inconsistencies in the story. It's a pretty forgiving way to tell your story. Now, when I said that Tarantino doesn't make character-driven stories that follows this template, that wasn't entirely true. Consider Django Unchained and Kill Bill. A freed slave ventures into unknown territory along with his wiser mentor figure to retrieve a certain subject of his that would grant him satisfaction. And in Kill Bill, Beatrix Kiddo goes on a violent quest to take revenge on all her fellow assassin members, and commissioning the help of an older, wiser mentor figure to gift her a great weapon. This is, in one way or another, what we read in the hero's journey story template. The audience follows the character's journey as they make their decisions, which leads them to the chosen character arc given to them, and the film has a complete chronology to its structure. But locational bottle films? That's a different story.
I'm acting like a professional. They get him, they could get you.
The word bottle in writing refers to any story that takes place within a confined space, like a wooden shack or a warehouse, and to fill that space with a colorful cast of characters that feed a certain contained conflict that never leaves the setting. It's like throwing a group of thieves in a cage with a single pistol and see which one makes it out. And usually, the setting itself becomes a character of the story. His two films, Reservoir Dogs and Hateful Eight, fall under this formula, and even have the same story outline. A group of criminal outlaws are trapped in a confined space where they have to gain a better understanding of one another to resolve their entrapment in the space. As long as the setting remains intact, the story can end in any way that it sees fit. And already the biggest difference between this and a character-driven story is that we don't follow just one character and their journey. The narrative focus can divide itself up among the rest of the characters.
We divide minis in half. The northern side.
Semi-chronological stories are probably his most common but also his most avant-garde stories that he writes, applicable to films like Pulp Fiction, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and my absolute favorite, Inglourious Basterds. In these stories, we loosely follow a series of story vignettes that in some way or another are tied to a central theme that is explored in each segment. And these stories are populated with characters that come from complete opposite sides of the narrative environment. We can spend time on the side of the antagonist, switch to the perspective of the protagonist, and jump to the perspective of a side character that in some way or another cross paths with the previous two, or in some cases, not at all. We do get enough characterization for the main characters, but the focus of these stories is to create more suspenseful events that can often ignore any concern for character safety. Inglourious Basterds and Pulp Fiction play to this to a full degree. The story is broken up into different chapters in a semi-chronological order. So all of his memorable films can be categorized based on his writing formulas. But what I want to look at are the pros and cons in telling stories in these different ways. Let's start with character-driven stories. Like I said previously, with character-driven stories you have a more forgiving approach to tell your stories. You can divide your story into reasonable acts that form a cohesive structure, and you can very easily create relatable characters. Take a look at Christoph Waltz's characters in both Django Unchained as Dr. King Schultz and Hans Landa in Inglourious Basterds. Now, if I were to ask you which one is the more entertaining character, then obviously it's Hans, because, I mean, come on. But if I were to ask you which character is more relatable, well, I'd have a hard time believing that Hans is a more heartfelt and relatable soul than Dr. Schultz. Why is that? Well, it's because Dr. Schultz is written in a character-driven story, and unrelatable characters are a con that comes with writing event films. We as an audience can just automatically connect to a character more if they are written in a character-driven story. But what pros do semi-chronological event films have? Well, this is where it gets interesting. I'm gonna show you two scenes, one from Pulp Fiction and one from Kill Bill. And I want you to consider which one has more narrative suspense.
Tell that bitch to be cool. Say, bitch, be cool. But I don't want that. And you don't want that. And Ringo here definitely doesn't want that. So let's see what we can do. Vincent, be cool. Yolanda, it's cool, baby.
In retrospect, Pulp Fiction has more narrative suspense, and it's mainly because of one reason. Its characters are devoid of plot armor. Plot armor is the idea that a character is protected from danger by his or her inclusion in the film as the protagonist, and the need for the story to be at a complete end. In Kill Bill, we obviously have reason to assume that Beatrix would survive her encounters, especially within the first film, because the film has to complete a full story. I mean, the name of the film is Kill Bill. And would it be Kill Bill if Beatrix dies before she gets to him? Probably not. This means that any dangers she faces in her story leaves very little dramatic tension. However, the same cannot be applied to Inglourious Basterds and Pulp Fiction. A great benefit to have exposed characters in a story is that you can very easily create dramatic tension in certain scenes where the character is in danger, because no characters in event films are protected by the plot. Consider the Bastards themselves. The whole group is introduced as a sort of Suicide Squad, with a great cast variety. You got the empowering commander calling the shots, the trigger-happy butcher, an over-the-top comic relief character, and the small skinny smartass. We have all the hallmarks of a typical rebel squad in a war film. But the film doesn't really spend time diving deep into any of these characters. This is intentional. The film is only aware of these characters as placeholders in a variety of story vignettes. We follow the overly masculine and hardcore methods of the bastards, the undercover operations of the German-born members, and the very awkward gambit plan of the endangered leftover squad. The same can be said about Lieutenant Archie Hickox. He has all the showmanship of a Han Solo type supporting character, entering the story in the middle acts, and his inclusion in the film is the pinnacle of a very well constructed scene, but his total screen time in the film barely stretches the half-hour mark in a 2.5-hour film. Put him in a basement with a bunch of trigger-happy soldiers and a Gestapo officer, then, well... Or in Pulp Fiction, we have the scene with Jules and Ringo. Now, even ignoring the fact that he shows up in later scenes completely fine, we can still have reason to suspect that Jules could be in complete danger because he is written in a film where John Travolta's character literally dies a few scenes later chronologically. We have reason for him to suspect that he would die. This is what makes this scene so suspenseful. Event films almost never hold back in putting their characters in any danger, because they're not meant to be written as protagonists. He prioritizes events over character. But then let's return to our third formula, bottle films. A great trait the Hateful Eight utilizes is by making the cabin in the blizzard a sort of arena for a character confrontation. All of these characters are trapped within this space, which means none of the characters in the film have the ability to abandon the action. In other words, the suspense has to be paid off somehow. Take the very last scene with Marcus, Mannix, and D'Armago. The entire duration of the film, the characters can't leave the shack because of a blizzard. Both characters are at odds with one another when D'Armago and Marcus are negotiating safe action. The only settlement that can be reached is either in D'Armago's fortune or in Marcus's fortune, and Mannix is the middleman. No matter who has the upper hand in this situation, the story has to force a resolution between these characters, because the third option, abandoning the shack, is unnegotiable. Now, even though Reservoir Dogs has a similar story outline, the actual substance creates a different trait. Something it does very well is use the absence of context to establish the dire situation of the characters in the warehouse. Tarantino throws us into the film with almost no information on who had what role in the events that preceded these moments. We don't know who the undercover cop is that jeopardized their heist, and the film takes its time to bring us to that conclusion. But as previously mentioned, this is a bottle film. So any dramatic tension that develops will have to be paid off within this very warehouse. Mr. Orange is a sheep in wolf's clothing, lying injured on the ground. The rest of the gang must hide out along with him as they uncover the mystery of the undercover cop, and the captured cop is sealed to his chair, waiting for his inevitable doom. No one can leave, therefore anyone is in danger.
That lump of shit's working with the LAPD.
All of this leads back to one single idea: tension. These different formulas are used as instruments that can play the most harmonious melodies of dramatic tension, and Tarantino has made a masterclass of composing these films that make use of these formulas. And also, he made very memorable characters that grace our screens, and his perfect choice of castings to bring those characters to life, while his many tools at his disposal create suspense that lie in the event films and bottle films. And he gave me my absolute favorite scene of all time. 10 out of 10.
Well, if this is it, old boy, I hope you don't mind if I go out speaking to kings.